Welcome to Back at the Movies, the podcast where we revisit our favorite Siskel and Ebert episodes.
Almost 50 years ago, two Chicago film critics, Gene Siskel.
I'm Gene Siskel of the Chicago Tribune.
And Roger Ebert.
And I'm Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times.
Were hired to discuss movies on a local PBS station. They were rivals and competitors, and over 3 decades, they never missed a chance to let the other one know he was wrong.
Their passion for film made them television stars and helped pave the way for a generation of movie lovers, including your hosts, Dylan Wilcox and Miranda Broder. I'm your co-host, Dylan Wilcox, a movie buff who went from selling popcorn at the local movie theater to working in Hollywood.
And I'm your co-host, Miranda Broder, an English and film teacher living in the Bay Area. We've experienced so many movies together throughout the years, and so many discoveries were thanks to Siskel and Ebert.
We'll be reviewing the movies and the reviewers, discussing if the films hold up and if their opinions hold up, as we hope to discover and rediscover some gems along the way.
This is Back at the Movies, and the balcony is open.
On today's episode from December 26, 1987, we spend time with Siskel and Ebert and 2 comedy legends, Robin Williams and Eddie Murphy. Both Good Morning Vietnam and Eddie Murphy Raw were huge hits that year that were built around their stars' personas and further cemented Williams and Murphy as 2 of the decade's biggest stars. Do their brands of humor hold up all these years later? Can topical humor from back then work today? We get into all that, as well as a Bill Cosby movie that most certainly does not hold up. We also look at a movie with a much different vibe starring Christine Lahti. Welcome to Back at the Movies. The balcony is open. All right, should I try it? Mm-hmm. Good morning, Vietnam! I don't think I'm a Robin Williams. I'm probably more like Bruno Kirby in the movie.
Some would say you're even funnier than Robin Williams.
Some would. Some people who might be wrong. You be the judge. Good Morning Vietnam, 1987, directed by Barry Levinson, starring Robin Williams of Mork and Mindy fame.
Yes.
He had done a few movies, but this was the one that really seemed to put him on the map. It stars Robin Williams as Adrian Cronauer, a radio DJ who is sent to Vietnam and kind of upends the boring, monotonous radio shows for the Army with his outlandish, hilarious, and controversial takes. Robin Williams, his first Oscar nomination, was a huge hit at the time. It was number 4 of the year. Talk about a different time. Ebert and Siskel loved it. Let's listen to what Siskel said.
For all of its comedy, Good Morning Vietnam is a touching film, too, because director Barry Levinson, who did Diner and The Natural and other fine films, very quietly keeps cutting into shots of the newsroom teletape, showing the progress of the war in terms of how many soldiers, 150 soldiers, 200,000 soldiers, 400,000 soldiers, as we commit more and more American troops to the action. That's a fine touch in a fine film with a great performance by Robin Williams.
I saw this at the time. I think this might have been my first R-rated movie. I might be wrong, but I would have been 11. And I did see it in the theater, and I was like, why do I know this movie so well? I had the soundtrack, which also had snippets of his routine in it. Yeah. So I have this natural affinity for it. And this is also one of the ones that I taped off HBO when we had it free for a weekend or something. So I saw the beginning of this a lot. So it was really exciting to go rewatch it as a movie that I have such fond memories of when it came out. How about you, Miranda?
I mean, I don't remember the specific moment when I went to see it. I definitely saw it in the theater when it came out. I loved it at the time. I think that Robin Williams, I mean, so much has been said about Robin Williams, but he had this incredible gift of being able to kind of disarm you with his comedy, and then come at you with like something very poignant and sad that really penetrated because of that disarming.
Yeah.
So he did that a lot in his films, where it was like funny and it kind of when something is humorous, when somebody uses humor and then pathos, I feel like you're open and you're ready to receive that in a way that's kind of more impactful than like when you start off with something sentimental or sad.
Yeah.
Like,
and it's so fast.
What's that?
Like, it comes at you so fast.
Yeah.
And like, you don't have time to like think if something was funny or not because you're on to the next thing.
Or be defensive, because, sometimes if something's considered a quote unquote tearjerker, I will be defensive from the start and like, nope, it's not going to make me cry. I'm tough.
Yeah.
Whereas this one is like, it's already got you laughing. And I think laughter really is it's such an opening for emotion. And so he does a fabulous, fantastic job of doing that in this film.
Yeah. And it was so fun to watch it early in his career before, because sometime in the 90s, I think it was Patch Adams, which I never saw, but I hated the trailer and it just felt so shticky and so schmaltzy. And so like, and I think a lot of me thinking of Robin Williams as that Robin Williams, and it was nice to kind of see him younger and fresher. And he was always a genius, but to see that kind of form at the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I rewatched it again recently, and it still holds up, I think. I think it's, still a really great movie. It's entertaining. It's also just, it's interesting to watch, like do you want to like play a couple more clips?
Yeah, we can talk about that and talk about what Siskel says about the scene. So this is a scene in the truck when they're stuck in traffic and Robin Williams starts entertaining some of the troops that are next to him.
Yeah.
The only problem is there is one scene where he does let some emotion come through, and that's when he visits the soldiers out of the truck, and it's quite emotional, and we see a little bit of him being heroic. And that, oddly enough, is the one scene that I thought, sure, it's easy. It was easy.
It went on too long.
It was easy to
way too long.
Right.
They're stuck in a traffic jam.
Right.
He starts entertaining the troops. The point could have been made briefly, and it goes on and on and on.
Right.
Maybe because they wanted to keep all of his ad libs.
Well, I think they wanted to make him a little more of a hero. They didn't need to. It's that good of a performance.
I completely disagree with the way he read that scene. Like that. I don't know. Yeah, to me, it wasn't about like, keeping the jokes going or making him a hero. Like to me, they weren't trying to make him a hero. I think it was a very like poignant and tender moment where I think what I was reading anyway was him looking at these young people going off to war. Like,
absolutely.
And just, because that's what he was kind of talking about in his shtick too. And then just looking at and really examining them. Like, to me, that scene didn't go on too long. Like, it was a necessary scene to understand, like, this is, why are we even trying to entertain these people? Because, it's tragic.
It's tragic, and it's another turning point for him. He has one earlier when he just narrowly escapes the restaurant that gets bombed, and this is another moment when it's one thing to, because I think as we're learning on this podcast, when you're talking into a microphone, you're kind of disembodied from the people that you're talking to who are listening to you, all of the 2 people out there, or 20,000. We don't know, And I think like so much of the movie is about the personal cost of war and how it can really affect you when it becomes personal rather than just political or abstract. And that first moment when the bomb explodes, he's like, oh, I could have been there, which actually happened, by the way. A lot of this movie did not happen accurately, but that's okay. Like this kind of second half with the road bomb and everything that was all made up to add drama, which I'm okay with. But I think that was a moment that he realizes that these are actual people that might die. And I think it was another poignant part about that scene is that he kind of wants it to go on. This is the last like they might see of anyone, and
right.
And he doesn't, really it just doesn't feel like you're like sending them off to their death, and he just wanted to like
humanizing
make it last for them. Yeah,
it's a very humanizing scene. Like you're really looking at the individual people, and I love that scene. I think, and it's very well done because it's not overly sentimental either. Like they're not like it's kind of just showing these guys. These are the guys that we're sending to war, and they're young. We're sending like 18-year-olds to go and fight, these wars and die, in these wars. And I thought it really worked. That was one of my favorite scenes in the whole movie. So that's funny that they both hated it.
Such a weird to point that out. I do think it's interesting talking about Robin Williams, the actor, versus the comedian. With Adrian Cronenberg, he did not do it. In fact, I read that the director didn't even let them meet because he wanted Robin Williams to do his own thing and not kind of base anything off of the real Adrian Cronenberg. And it really is Robin Williams doing the Robin Williams thing. And there's so much improv. And you can really see like Barry Levinson just letting him do his thing.
Yeah.
And Ebert kind of talks about Williams as a character, as an actor in clip 2.
There's one facet of the film that I'd like to talk about because it fascinated me so much. And this has nothing to do with the war, curiously enough. It's the betrayal of that character. He plays a guy who is all words. There is a wall between whoever is inside that character and his words. He uses the humor, he uses the stand-up comedy, he uses the one-liners, he uses the patter to hold people off. And at the end of the movie, curiously enough, we know a lot about the personalities of all the supporting characters, but that central Robin Williams character is still a complete mystery. There was just no glimpse into it, and that to me is brilliant because it shows a certain kind of comic personality that I haven't seen in the movies before, where the comedians are using the humor to say, don't look inside, I'm going to keep you laughing the whole time.
I think that's really astute, and it really points out without learning too much about him, you still get his transformation when, like, the comedy, as you said earlier, is so disarming and really does invite you in. And then he has that moment about halfway through the movie when he realizes that he's not able to talk about what's actually happening. And there's there's a brilliant scene when he tries to do his comedy shtick, and then he starts saying what actually happened about the bomb exploding. It gets thrown out, and you see that change in his character. And it really is a good marriage of a comedian's personality and a role.
Yeah, and maybe the cross. I mean, in a way, it just came to me when you said that the movie is kind of showing. A lot of times, comedy is a way of educating people, but in a palatable kind of way, right? Where does the entertainment value of comedy start and stop? And when does it become, something more, something like kind of subversive? And so I think the movie itself that's what it's about, subversiveness in a way. I would say that's maybe one of the main themes of that movie.
And a certain progressiveness in the sense that, the Bruno Kirby character, who's so good in it, wants the old-fashioned way of doing comedy and Marx Brothers and that tension between conservatism and something that's more liberal and
free-flowing.
True, yeah, and truth, and comedy can be truth, and we laugh instinctively because something just feels truthful, and it might be wrong or outlandish or controversial, but it's using that power, as you say, of comedy to change people's minds.
Yeah, for sure.
It made me, oh my gosh, this movie was number 4 at the box office.
Oh yeah.
And we think of so many 80s movies, you think of Spielberg and Raiders of the Lost Ark and Back to the Future, and that was when the kind of corporatization of cinema happened. But it's a reminder, this and movies like Rain Man that Barry Levinson did the next year, just in terms of endearment, was number 2 of that year. And Kramer versus Kramer, there was space for these drama comedies.
Yeah, it felt like they were making movies for not just 12-year-old boys anymore. And that a lot of people were going to the movie together too. If a movie like Terms of Endearment was, so got such a box office turnout, that's not just 12-year-old boys going to see it.
No, and it's also having to be more of an adult, going back to my experience, I do remember seeing this in the theater, and I must have been pretty young. I was definitely not 17, and being excited to like start consuming entertainment for grown-ups and feeling like I was growing up rather than felt like the movies had to come down to, our level. Really and that my parents trusted me to watch it.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Like, I feel like nowadays we really do, like, we adults have to come down to the children's level. And sometimes these children's movies will have like a little nod to adults, like a little wink, like, okay, the adults will get this. But when we were kids, I think we saw films that were probably pretty adult. I mean, I saw The Big Chill, The Terms of Endearment, these kind of heavy films with my parents when I was like 14, I mean, I wasn't really
also
old,
because we're dinosaurs now. The 80s, you had 3 channels, maybe some more if you had cable, and then you had movies. So there was a lot less options, which I think like also contributed to, you kind of all had to go see the same thing, and that often meant seeing something that was maybe more adult than.
I think it also just speaks to different personalities and what's kind of like the thing that really gets your juices flowing, I guess, is for me, like when I think back to those days, I was really into really intensely sad movies, like Terms of Endearment, Kramer versus Kramer, movies that made me cry. I liked to watch them. It was like what got me to see them repeatedly. I liked that catharsis, I guess.
It was going on a journey, and I think that's still like what's it's like, oh yeah, it's going to make you sad, but there's making you sad, but there's also, as you say, catharsis and coming out the other side feeling older and wiser.
Maybe that is it's not when we watch scary movies and stuff like that, it's like preparing us for, it's helping us know that we can get through stuff. That people somebody can fight the monsters. We have that power. And so for me, I preferred like the emotional fighting of psychological monsters.
Yeah.
Yes.
And you're so right that this movie does that disarming thing, and it starts off so much like a comedy that like it does endear you to him and to the movie, and then when it becomes more dramatic, it means more.
So yes, I would give this film definitely a thumbs up. I loved it, and I still love it. It's still worth watching. It's very entertaining, and it's also a mix of, packs a wallet emotionally.
Thumbs up for me. So we're to revisit, especially this many years later, 30 some odd years later when this came out. It was like, it was only 12 years after the end of the war. Just really start realizing how recent some of these war movies were. Siskel and Ebert also gave it 2 big thumbs up. So we all agree. Good Morning Vietnam. Worth checking out. And seeing a baby Robin Williams and a baby Forrest Whitaker, who I also want to say was fantastic in this movie.
Yes, he was. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, are you ready to talk raw?
Fuck yeah.
Fuck yeah. Should we try to say more F-bombs than Eddie Murphy does in this movie?
Maybe.
Which at the time was the most amount of fucks in a movie until Goodfellas a few years later. Yeah.
Dylan, that's the kind of fact that you would totally look up.
Well, we're doing our half-assed Wikipedia reading.
No, but I don't know if you remember when you were younger, when you read The Catcher in the Rye, and you were like, there's 186 swear words.
You're so right. Oh my God, I forgot. I used to count swear words when I started going to movies, and I'd be like, that had 5 fucks, 3 shits. Well, it's a good thing I didn't do that for Raw, because he lets loose. He was notorious for it.
Yes.
So this movie was 1987. It was his second stand-up movie after Delirious. Raw, which was 1983, I think, whatever, early 80s, when it was really okay to be homophobic, as opposed to 1987, when it was obviously still really okay to be homophobic. So this was his follow-up. It was also the highest-grossing concert film ever at 50 million.
Okay.
Let's hear what Siskel said first, and then we can launch into what I'm assuming might be a tirade, but maybe not. We'll see.
Okay.
Here's Siskel.
He's foul, but very funny, talking in brutally honest comedic terms about sex and marriage. The concert tails off at the end somewhat with a tired bit about how badly white people dance. Most of us know that. But more often than not, at least us two, more often than not, Eddie Murphy lives up to the concert film standard set by the man he calls his idol, Richard Pryor. And that is high praise indeed. I really liked Eddie Murphy Raw.
Miranda, did you really like Eddie Murphy Raw?
Well, when I first saw it back in the day in 1987, I really liked it. I thought it was hilarious and really funny, and I hadn't laughed that much, I think, in a movie ever, maybe, except for The Gods Must Be Crazy.
Did you see it in the theater?
Yes.
Okay.
I saw it in the theater, and I really thought it was hilarious back then. And then I watched it, recently again, and I was like, it was making me get embarrassed for the fact that Siskel and Ebert watched it. I was like, how did they get through this? It's just so just specific and nasty at times. There's still some very memorable parts to it that I still find to be indelible in my head. Two that stand out to me. One that stands out to me is when he describes the hamburger, the McDonald's hamburger. He really wants to go and get McDonald's, but his mom is like, "Oh, I can make you a hamburger," because they're kind of low income or whatever. And she's like, "I can make you a hamburger." So she starts chopping the onions and the grease is splattering and everything. And he's like, she packs it all out into this giant ball and then splat right on a piece of Wonder Bread. He's like, "That's not McDonald's." That always lives in my mind. Is because I remember feeling that way myself growing up. Just like we didn't have the money to always be eating out or anything like that. And so my parents would make, or my mom would make things. Just that feeling. But then he says, "Yeah, but I would really love one of those hamburgers now." It's, it's like nostalgic to his childhood. Yeah, no, I mean, okay, so my review of it's very dated. What about you? What do you think?
I think I was more in line with Ebert. So let's hear his initial reaction. Clip 2.
Gene, I don't think this film deserves comparison to Richard Pryor in any way, because what Richard Pryor has is insight and sympathy with the humanity of the people that he's making fun of. And that's the one thing that's lacking in this concert film by Eddie Murphy.
I agree. I didn't have a lot of history with Eddie Murphy in the 80s. He was too adult still, and though I watched a lot of adult movies, I wasn't doing a lot of adult comedies. And it was too dirty, I think. And I think a lot of stuff that my parents didn't watch that was rated R, I wasn't watching because I wasn't going with them. So this was something crass that I just wasn't on my radar. I started watching Delirious in college, like a month or two after I came out of the closet, and he launches that comedy show about fags and AIDS. And it is so offensive. I just come out and living my truth, and I was like, nope, not watching it, and I left the room. And I'd never seen Delirious, so this is the first time watching it. So I had no nostalgia. I have no
So you didn't watch Raw when it came out?
No, this was my first time. Yeah, so this is my first watch, and I call me a prude. Didn't land for me. None of it. I can totally see that because I didn't love it either the second time. It was pretty offensive at times, and I think you're right. I kind of agree with what it was Ebert who was saying that, right? That I don't mind. It's not the potty talk. It's none of that. It's just that it's mean spirited. It's mean spirited, and I was thinking about our discussion about There's Something About Mary and the punching down.
Yeah.
And he immediately, out of the gate, he exerts his male dominance, and this is going to be all about machismo. And he takes down, and and the misogyny all cloaked in like, that's how it is. I think it doesn't land because not only am I not straight, I'm like, women, am I right? But I don't see like the kernel of truth. It's kind of what Ebert says. There's no insight. There just seems this hatred of women. And anyway, let's hear a little bit more about Siskel and Ebert. Get into a little bit.
I don't believe anybody can get away with talking about blacks the way that Eddie Murphy talks about women in this film, on the basis of what he says in this film and the way he uses the key four-letter word as a club. This movie hates and despises and puts down and rejects women and sees them only in terms of their sexual function.
Not at all.
Yes,
not at all. No. Let me answer. Let me answer, because the film comes around and goes right back and throws it back at men. Yes, it is more loaded against women than it is against men. But Roger, where is your sense of humor? The man is not
throwing at men.
Yes, it does.
Everybody in terms of what takes place right between their belt and their knees.
That's
the only part of the human being that he's interested in. He doesn't have any interest at all in their personalities, in their problems, in their humanity.
One of their problems is
bathroom humor, Gene.
And it's very funny. It's very funny.
It's not that.
This is our first full-on fight with Siskel and Ebert.
Yes, but we're not going to fight because we actually agree with
we agree. Yeah, I thought you were gonna hate it as much as I did, and I think this is the thing with comedy and with someone's point of view. If you're not on board in the first, especially this movie, it just kind of turned me off at the beginning, much like Delirious did. Yeah, and it's not. And I'd like to think. And maybe no one thinks that they're a prude, so maybe I am now. Maybe I am as I get older. But like, I'm willing to take the piss out of something if it's funny, and it's like, oh, I can't believe he said that, but it's kind of true. But this just feels, as Ebert says, mean-spirited. Yeah. And I disagree with Siskel that it like comes back around. I don't think it does, and I think men get off the hook.
Yeah, I think that's a really sneaky way of somehow thinking you're making it okay to put down all these women because you also kind of put down, the men like a little, but it's all putting down. It's all like, I'm curious to know what African Americans, what some African Americans might think of this film now, because, it's, I don't see it as even being like culturally that relevant, it's not. It's
also so much of it was the shock. So another thing about this movie, it got an X rating, and they had to keep cutting it down to get an R. So it was like an X based on language. And I think now we're so used to such pervasive language that that was part of the fun of it in the 80s, was to be so shocking. Oh, this is about their argument too. I love that if you don't like something, it's so easy, especially a comedy, you have all this evidence of why it doesn't work.
Yeah.
But if you like it, like Siskel's thing is like, no, you're wrong. It's funny.
Well, also comedy is such a visceral, it's, you either like it or you don't. Like you either get the joke.
The defense is like, well, I laughed. Like, did you talk about your human nature? But then I just started picking it apart. He goes into the whole, he obviously is really into hot women, and he totally, values an attractive woman, but he's also so suspicious of them, and they just want me for my money, and going to the Johnny Carson thing. But then he later on says I hate bitches who just want a salad. So I'm like, what? Which one is it? Right. What do you want? Yeah. And there's I think the other thing, there's no self-deprecation. There's no inner, I think great comedians, and I think Richard Pryor could do this too, was to kind of have this stepping back and having this introspection, and there's none of that. And I just want to I don't want to go into it, but this reminded me of the incident in the 90s when he was caught with a transgendered prostitute. And his defense was, I was just giving her a ride, and it's, it was all I was just out picking up magazines, and this is all alleged. I don't want to get sued by anyone, but I just think it's fascinating that his whole shtick in the 80s was I'm a dude, and we're going to talk about, what being a strong man is keeping women in their place and making fun of fags. And he did apologize for that later, and I do appreciate that. It never triggered my okay, but that's funny part of my brain.
Like little too late kind of thing. Yeah. It's laughably, it's not like I can even muster it's so laughably sexist that I couldn't even get worked up about it. I was like, this is just, I just wrote it off.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate. You don't want to be, I think the worst thing in the world is just to be written off. It's like apathy is worse than hate, right? Because hate, at least you care enough about the person for some passion. But I just felt like, oh my God, this is just stupid,
And the other fascinating thing is the whole bit about Bill Cosby.
Oh, I know.
Calling him.
We would talk about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we will, because we'll touch on Leonard Part 6 a little bit. The role reversal that he was so into being wholesome.
Yeah.
And went after Eddie Murphy for being crass. And now Eddie Murphy is the one doing family films. And Bill Cosby was raping women.
Yeah, no. Well, and I guess you got to give Eddie Murphy credit here that he does a good Bill Cosby impression.
Oh, he was great. And he is so talented. And I don't want to take, I kept watching. He is so talented and just really commits. And he is a brilliant comedian. And I should say that I don't take issue with that. I was just the material. I was just, nope, not.
Yeah, he's better when he kind of tells the stories, like the McDonald's story, the hamburger story, because that's actually giving some insight into, I don't know, something that people can relate to in a certain way, rather than
childhood, and kind of it came from a place of his pain rather than other people's pain.
Exactly. Like that would be a more of an introspective kind of thing. So yeah, the times when he does that, it's like, that's when I think and I really feel like that. That story stayed with me all these years. I've always thought of it. And then, so I do think that there's something to that. The fact that I would even remember that story from a movie in 87 or whatever. Yeah.
Wait, we didn't finish. They go further, Siskel and Ebert. So let's hear how they wrap up this fight.
Yeah.
You think it's funny, then maybe you need to grow up along with Eddie Murphy.
Oh, Roger,
that's right. You can both go to Richard Pryor and learn how to be a little more mature.
No, let me tell you, it is very, very funny. Oddly, people who haven't seen this film are going to agree, gee, Roger's right, it should be clean. It should be clean.
No, I
you really play to the audience.
I'm not playing to the audience, and I'm not saying it should be clean. I have nothing against four-letter language.
Right.
I love it. Richard Pryor uses it. Richard Pryor uses it as poetry. Eddie Murphy uses it as a bludgeon.
Okay, I disagree with you. I think Richard Pryor is a genius. I think Eddie Murphy is getting there.
Personal attack, Ebert. He's like, you need to grow up. And then Siskel's like, no, it's funny.
And I actually often agree with Siskel a lot. Maybe taste-wise, I think I agree with him maybe more often. Not on this one. But then again, I gotta go back to the time I did agree with him. I probably would have agreed with him back then. I would have thought that Ebert was being a stick in the mud and maybe projecting too much of his sort of white culture, onto, it's hard for, he's like, I enjoy, like a 4-letter word now and again, but this was just over the top. I can see how, he could think that Siskel could think that was kind of, just being stuffy or something.
I was wondering if I saw this movie even today at a screening with a bunch of Eddie Murphy fans, if I would kind of get swept up and think it was more funny as opposed to watching it here with already kind of a bias because of Delirious. But then it's interesting because then I saw when he started doing the family stuff, that's when I came around. And I remember seeing The Nutty Professor with my sister and we were dying. It was so funny.
Yeah.
And then Bowfinger I thought was hilarious. And he's really one of the greats. Yeah. It's just the material. I was like, not for me. I'm starting to realize the more episodes that we do that it's really a special case for comedy to span across and still be relevant across time.
Totally. I mean, I've taught film classes in the past, and the hardest ones are the comedy ones. They're either too dirty for people and they just want to walk out, or else they're just like not funny, or, like when they're too intellectual and then people are kind of bored. It's so specific to certain personalities. Comedy, it's just really, really hard to get any kind of consensus on that.
Okay, so obviously Siskel and Ebert disagreed on this. Siskel thumbs up, Ebert thumbs down. I'm with Ebert.
And I also agree with Ebert on this one, so I'm going to give it a thumbs down.
Not one to revisit, but other Eddie Murphy movies, I'll give thumbs up when we get to them at some other future point.
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to touch briefly on the other movie they talk about in this episode, Leonard Part 6, starring Bill Cosby, notorious flop from 1987. I think I saw parts of it as a kid. Neither of us felt like revisiting it, and that's okay.
We're good enough. We're smart enough. We saw that people like us.
No need to track down a Bill Cosby movie from the 80s. I think we're good. But this is my memory of, this was such a flop that I remember joking with my friends in 1987. Oh, that movie's as bad as Leonard Part 6. That made it into our lexicon. That was our showgirls of the 80s.
I was going to say, it's like showgirls, right?
Spoiler alert, Siskel and Ebert hated this. But I do want to play this clip because Ebert goes off on this movie, and I just love it. So let's play Leonard first clip.
Okay.
The whole movie is a mess, and even though Cosby has disowned it, he cannot escape all the blame. I don't think so. In one scene, his 20-year-old daughter brings home a 66-year-old man that she wants to marry. Cosby is appalled. This guy is robbing the cradle. What does he do? He calls for a sandwich and a Coke. And then he holds the Coke bottle prominently next to his face for the rest of the scene. First it says Coca-Cola, then the next shot it says Coke, in case you missed the point. Who released this movie? Columbia. Who owns Columbia? Coca-Cola. What is Coca-Cola doing with this movie? They have a lot of products in this movie, Gene, that you can get a tie-in where you can get the product in connection with buying a ticket for the movie. I think that is an all-time low.
Ebert reading product placement to filth. It reminded me of the outrage that we had for product placement in movies in the 80s and 90s, and now that's such a battle that we lost.
The most hypocritical one was Reality Bites. Remember that one?
Yes.
So much product placement in that movie that was supposedly talking about what sellouts people are. And
God, I can't wait to revisit that one.
I still have that feeling when something goes to the trouble of avoiding product placement. And I guess their argument is that it's not realistic to not see an actual Coke can or whatever because people drink Coke. Yeah, but you don't have to focus on it, it could be kind of a little blurred out. I appreciate that though, because I feel like it cheapens it so much in my view.
And here is Siskel's response to Ebert, which is also priceless.
Bill Cosby, the richest man in show business, $67.5 million income last year, reduced to holding a Coca-Cola bottle next to his face in order to get a picture made at Columbia. He ought to be ashamed of himself.
Boy, you're upset. And I am too.
And me too.
God bless getting upset over a Coke can. and me three.
You're upset.
And that was before we learned what Bill Cosby was doing during this time.
Yes.
Placing a whole nother kind of product. Okay, I'll stop.
All right, you're upset.
Thank goodness there was never a Leonard Part 7.
So, thumbs down?
Thumbs down.
Sight unseen, except for the random parts I watched when I was a kid.
Yeah. Some of it you don't even need to know, you don't even need to watch it to know that you're going to dislike it. So
yes, I love when the four of us are all on board. It feels like such harmony. Even if it has to be about Leonard Part 6.
Yes, it does feel like we're all one big family now.
Thank you for being here.
Next up is Housekeeping. It was filmed in 1987. It's a comedy drama, directed by Bill Forsyth, and it stars Christine Lahti. It's based on Marilyn Robinson's 1980 novel called Housekeeping, which I actually did read and loved. It's one of my favorite books, I think. It's about two young sisters who are growing up in the 1950s, and their mother abandons them with relatives, and then their mother's sister comes to live with them and sort of take care of them, in quotes, in an unpredictable way.
Let's hear what they had to say. Here's Ebert.
If Housekeeping were simply the story of a mentally ill woman, it'd be a much simpler movie. But Aunt Sylvia is not merely strange. She has a whole different world view. She doesn't let things get to her. She doesn't bother herself with a lot of details. She's generally very delighted with life. She looks on the bright side. One of her young nieces identifies with that, and the other one does not. And that choice is the heart of this story.
Yeah.
Should we just hear what Siskel said too? Because I think he had similar things to say.
And he's handled comedy so well, it really comes as a surprise when he tackles his first serious film, and it works too. The interesting character for me, of course, is the aunt, but I also want to focus on the niece, the older girl who sides with the aunt and almost takes her behavior to an extreme. She's very quiet, very much to herself. She doesn't want to play by any rules. Even the aunt is a little too oppressive for her. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if there were room in the world for these kind of people who don't want to play by the rules? I think that's the whole heart of the movie.
I did not read the book, but how did you feel about it as an adaptation?
I think it was a good adaptation. Now, I should say that I read the book probably about 10 years ago, and then I saw I hadn't seen Housekeeping the movie until just before this podcast. So I had not seen it when it originally came out. So a lot of my memory of the book has kind of faded, but this brought back a lot of it. And I mean, of course, a book is always going to have that internal voice that is harder to do in a movie. Although they do kind of handle that pretty well with some voiceover stuff, and because it's from the perspective of the eldest daughter. So I think it's actually a really good adaptation because it kind of gets at the essence of what I think Robinson was trying to say in her novel. What did you think of it, the movie?
Having not read it, I didn't have anything to go off of, and I really felt like I was watching an adaptation of a novel and not something in and of itself. I wasn't wild about it.
Okay.
I thought the voiceover, it was too much, and it felt too literary. It just didn't feel like it was really strongly character-based, and it didn't have that more personal touch, like, say, To Kill a Mockingbird or something. It just, I think the line deliveries were a little flat. And it's hearing Siskel and Ebert and you talk about it, it like does make me want to read the novel because I like what it's trying to do. I just don't know if it really succeeded. I thought the pacing was just a little slow. And Christine Lahti's character, I love her as an actress. She's in one of my favorite movies around the same time, Running on Empty.
Oh yeah,
I'm sure we'll talk about it at some point.
Yeah,
I think she is so great.
Yeah,
and this one, it just I just wanted a bit more colors or range or something, and I don't think it was. So I appreciated it didn't go down that route of like, oh, she has mental problems. Right. So I did appreciate the whimsy, but it just didn't click for me, I must say.
To me, what's that fine line between being sort of an independent thinker when it comes to parenting and going with like your intuition and your using your emotional intelligence, I guess, versus like what the societal norm is for parenting. And I appreciated that the movie handles that really well. I feel like it's kind of it's a very delicate issue, I think, because you could see this woman as being neglectful in certain ways. She isn't helping her wards like blend into society or become, but she is helping at least one of them emotionally. She lets the other one go, which I think is another thing, like to be able to let somebody go is is a skill and a strength. But she becomes like this emotional. She becomes a comfort to the eldest daughter, and who is probably a little bit more like her. I don't know. I really liked the film a lot. I liked that it was kind of slow moving. They used a lot of like the scenery to also set the mood and the pace. And I hear what you're saying about it being kind of flat, the acting, especially with the kids.
I know, I feel bad saying that, but
yeah, no, I understand that.
but I said it.
For some reason, I guess it maybe did seem more like a play, perhaps, in that kind of stilted way that sometimes language can come across in a play. I just didn't mind it. I still got into the characters. I still felt like I was getting to know them. Yeah, it definitely kept my interest and made me want to find out what was going to happen to these people.
I feel like the statedliness, is that a word?
Mm-hmm.
Kind of went against the chaos of the situation, and I think I wanted something a bit more. I don't know if visceral is the right word, but something a bit more chaotic, because it was like a crazy situation these daughters were in, kind of getting passed from person to person, and a really tragic circumstance. And I just didn't feel like it like penetrated. And I feel like it almost played it safe, like a lot of movies did in the 80s.
In what way?
A movie I kept thinking of was Terms of Endearment, which was also like based on a book about like moms and children. And that just felt like it had more of a lifeblood to it and more of a energy surrounding it, where I just didn't feel a lot of the energy here, especially from like such a complicated character that Christine Lahti plays. I
have to disagree with you on that one, because I mean, I love Terms of Endearment. I'm not saying anything bad about that. I feel like they were just different people, and that these were like not quite as dramatic or worldly in a lot of ways people as those characters were in Terms of Endearment. I felt like I appreciated the lack of drama, and it felt very much more realistic to me, like the way that, and also that you're an observer of these people without judgment. That's what it was. That's what it was. Is that
that's true.
It lacked any kind of judgment on the part of the filmmakers. Like, it's like, here, we're going to present these people, and you can kind of put your own feelings into you can kind of apply your own or project your own feelings onto it. And it didn't create any false drama just for dramatic sake. I mean, I'm thinking of a scene in Terms of Endearment, which, because you brought it up, I'm just going to talk about it. I mean, I love Terms of Endearment. It's one of my favorites. But the scene in the hospital when she wants her daughter to get the drugs.
Mm-hmm.
Give my daughter the shot. That's definitely a scene where they're trying to like get an emotion out of you, and it works. This movie though is different in that it's not necessarily manipulating your emotions in that kind of way, and it's definitely not sentimentalizing like grief or suicide or just the ways in which we adapt to new situations that we're put into. And they didn't over-explain a lot of things. I feel like we still got the main points and themes without having to be like hit over the head with a lot of drama or explanation.
Yeah, I didn't want to be hit over the head, but I wanted to be like lightly tapped sometimes.
Yeah.
I did like the end. It does end really beautifully, and it didn't. It wasn't predictable, but yeah, and just the voiceover. Like, I'm not a big fan of voiceover in movies anyway, unless it's really distinct reason. And this just felt it relied on it a lot to tell what was going on. And I wish that could have happened a little bit more with the performances, especially the daughters.
Yeah. But I would definitely give this one a thumbs up. And I think it has. I didn't see it back when it came out, but I feel like it's still relevant, and in some ways even more so now, because I feel like we're so judgmental of parents and parenting, like, these days, and there's such a divide. I mean, this is truly a feminist film. It's like, here's this person who's living her own dream, she's not conforming to anybody else's idea of what things should be like, what life should be like. So, I mean, isn't that the ultimate feminist sort of statement?
Yeah. Well, maybe I will read the book and then rewatch the movie and change my thumb. But it's not an active thumbs down. But yeah, I can't fully recommend it. Well, Siskel and Ebert loved it.
Mm-hmm.
So the cheese stands alone on this one.
Would you give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down?
I would say thumbs down.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Not like it would be thumbs medium, but that's such a cop out. So I've got like ultimately, like, what is this about? Like, this, unless you really love the book or something, then like, oh, it might be interesting to watch the movie, but is this one to seek out? I think there are other ones.
Okay. Yeah.
Thanks for listening to Back at the Movies. I'm your host, Dylan Wilcox.
And I'm your host, Miranda Broder. You can find us on social and Letterboxd at BATMPOD. That stands for Back at the Movies Pod. We'd like to thank our producer, Travis Bone, and Jay Edwards for the original music.
If you enjoyed our podcast, please give us 2 thumbs up by rating us 5 stars on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere you listen. That's our show, and until next time, the balcony is still closed.